The Radical Secular, a video series dedicated to the separation of church and state and the pursuit of justice.
Hello and welcome back to The Radical Secular. I'm Christophe Difo.
And I'm Sean Prophet.
Today we're going to talk to you about Trump, and we're going to talk to you about his crackdown on federal anti-racism training in the government. And we're going to talk to you about a sheriff out of Arkansas who is a racist, but he claims that he's not a racist and he couldn't possibly be a racist because he is, wait for it, a great Christian man. And look, so our new female intro voice is, you probably noticed that, and we're going to talk to you about that and the implications for the AI singularity. And we're going to talk about Star Trek, because how often do we talk about Star Trek? It's awesome. And we're going to talk about how Star Trek predicted America's current predicament. But before we get into that, let's do some housekeeping. I want to remind you to make sure to subscribe to the podcast and subscribe to us on YouTube by hitting that bright red subscribe button. And look, if you are a friend of the show, go ahead and give us a 5-star rating. We'll take it, and tell your friends and your family. Word of mouth really does matter. All that stuff really does matter, so please do that. I also want to plug the Just Words Fallacy Medium publication. Just Words Fallacy posts weekly articles from progressive, diverse authors related to politics, religion, rationality, and justice. The link is in the show notes. If you are interested in publishing some of your work, showcasing your beautiful writing here on the Just Words Fallacy publication, here is our contact info.
Email us at theradicalsecular@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at @radical_secular. Follow us on Twitter at Radical Secular. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcasts at Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher.
Now, let's get into the t-shirts, shall we? And into the fun. So today I am wearing a brand new t-shirt I got. You know what? Maybe I'll put the name of the t-shirt manufacturer in the show notes, because they are just awesome. They have so many progressive, amazing t-shirts. And who knows? Maybe who knows what happens. Anyway, so I'll describe it for everybody that is listening. So it is a variation on the Black Power fist holding in a sort of rainbow background, and also with the woman-man sort of symbol. So I'll show you everybody now. I'm going to have to step away from the microphone, obviously, so here it goes. And I think it's just pure badassery. What do you think, Sean?
I think that is awesome. I love it. And it's like, talk about intersectionality. There it is right there on one shirt.
Boom. Love it. Love it. Anyway, so what about you, Sean?
Well, my shirt is very simple. I don't even have to stand up. It says, "Don't make me repeat myself. History."
Yes. You showed before the show, everybody, before the show, we always, talk and we joke and we look at each other's t-shirts and we talk about them. And I laughed out loud when I heard that because it was just so perfect. I mean, just like, because we're watching history repeat itself, right? And we can get into those news articles. Maybe you want to kick it off with the news articles too, because we're watching history repeat itself.
It's very interesting because this week I ran across an old clip from, I don't know what paper it was just floating around Facebook, and it was basically an article talking about how Hitler was, speaking in front of 50,000 people about law and order. And it was there had been riots and protests, and they were describing how a communist had shot a Nazi, or a Nazi had shot a communist, and there were beatings, there were the same exact kind of conflict that we're seeing right now play out across the United States over racism. This same thing was going on politically. And what was interesting about the article is that there was I don't know if it was the communist candidate, but the other candidate, I believe it was Hindenburg, was ahead.
Yeah, I think that's right.
By 30 or 40%. I mean, had a huge lead over Hitler, and it basically said in the article that both sides were confident that their candidate was going to win. And it was just so striking to me because here we are. And, a lot of people really object to these comparisons to Hitler, but I got to tell you that RNC and that law and order message that they've been pounding away at, no one will be safe in Joe Biden's America, okay? That is the fear message. That is the same way that Hitler rose to power, is on the back of this fear message. And it was the same thing too, because we have our conflict right now on the Democratic side between the Biden supporters, which is most of the party, and those who still are mad that Bernie or some other progressive candidate didn't win the primary. And so there's people who literally, these are people who are even further to the left than the Democratic Party, who are not going to vote for Joe Biden because they believe that somehow he's going to be as bad, or somehow, the country is going to be as bad off if Biden wins as if Trump wins. And I just don't understand it. The communists and the socialists were also fighting when Hitler got elected. And this is something that's as serious as a heart attack. And, I'm tired of repeating that. That's where we're at, though.
Yeah. Oh, fucking God. You know what? You're absolutely right. Absolutely right, Sean. And it's interesting that you brought this up, because I've been thinking a lot about this week. In fact, just yesterday, I started a book, and it's a long one. It's called A Bridge Too Far. Interestingly, so I wrote a piece for Just Words Fallacy a couple weeks ago called A Bridge Too Far. It was about the Postal Service and sort of ham-handed crackdown from the Trump administration on the Postal Service, and how that was a bridge too far for most Americans, right? He is a budding fascist and a budding fascist administration, but that sort of overt sort of fucking around was too much. But it made me decide to read this other book, is the point, because I was like, oh yeah, The Bridge Too Far, which is actually a reference to World War II. And the Allied attempt to end the war before Christmas with Operation Market Garden. It was a failure, as any person who knows history will know, because the war did not end until the spring, or really, I guess, late spring, I believe, right? I can't remember exactly. Although VE Day was just recently, so victory in Europe. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is that in this book, as I'm reading it, there is really detailed discussions about German generals and field marshals, which is above a general, by the way. That is like the captain of like the commander of an army, essentially, an entire army. There was discussion of Hitler and his personality and what it was like to interact with him as a coworker, right? As a boss. Mm-hmm. Not as a fascist who is trying to destroy the world and murder all the Jewish people, but just as a boss, right? As an administrative person. And it mirrors almost exactly the descriptions we get out of the Trump administration. Like the people that have worked with Trump directly, people who say that he can't even focus on one thing for more than a few seconds without asking questions that are completely out of left field, right? I mean, I think there's this idea that Hitler was some sort of like amazing, sort of brilliant guy. He wasn't a good administrator. He wasn't a good soldier. He wasn't a good tactician. He was a really good speaker, right? Yeah. And he was a really good fascist. And that's what we're seeing. The parallels in the Trump administration are astonishing. I just want to bring that up just because it's on my mind. Also, check out that book. It's actually pretty damn good.
Yeah, and what I want to point out about Trump is that, and this is what I've also read about Hitler, is that the pettiness.
Yes, the pettiness, dude. The pettiness, exactly.
Hitler used to do voices and impressions to make fun of people. It's kind of like, it's very similar to the way that Trump, comes up with these little names for people, and he berates them on Twitter and things like that. And it's just like, this pettiness. And I want to bring up something else that we didn't talk about at the top of the show, and that is the controversy right now that Trump is having with the military and how he disparaged people who went into the military. I mean, it started out with John McCain, of course, and originally he's
the Gold Star family. Remember the Gold Star family? So it started there, right? Or maybe it did start with McCain and then the Gold Star family. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, Sean.
Well, it was right around that time. He was introducing America basically to the idea that a president could make fun of those who would normally have been venerated as heroes. And he just, it's across the board now. And the situation was, I prefer people who weren't captured, referring to John McCain's, time, 5 years or however long he was a prisoner of war, where he was just tortured and, maimed, actually. Like, a lot of people don't realize, because he functioned later in life, but he had to go through, an amazing amount of physical therapy just to be able to even function. And, the sacrifice and suffering that John McCain, bore for this country as a soldier is legendary. And then you got Trump saying, well, I prefer people who weren't captured, and he's taken that even further to, he didn't want amputees to be seen in parades. He just doesn't want it, it's all great to beat your chest and say, make America great, and say you support the troops, but then, to say these things in private, disparaging people, like, why would they join the army? They're suckers, he said, and then he denies this. Okay, he denies that he said it. And at the same time, he asks that the Fox News reporter who confirmed the story, the original story came out in the Atlantic, and then it was picked up by other news organizations. But then, Fox News originally denied it, and then when they checked the facts, they found out that this was actually true. And the rumor is that it came from John Kelly. We don't really know where the story came from, but it's pretty clear, it's pretty true to character that Trump would say these things. And then, he goes and says, let's fire the Fox News person who said this was true. And then he rails about cancel culture. Like,
you just can't make this shit up. And it's so fucked up that we have to keep saying every show that you can't make this shit up. But honestly, as a person, right, who is deeply, deeply sort of respectful of the military, right? A fun fact about me is that I didn't go to high school. Didn't go to college right after high school, and so I was in a really just sort of down place in my life, and I went to try to join the United States Marines. This is before 9/11, though, right? So it was frankly just months before 9/11, which is wild. But I tried to join, and I couldn't because I had a case pending, actually, right? So I had a criminal case pending at the time. That was who I was back then, troubled, deeply troubled. But the point is that, like, that was my level of commitment to the military. I have a deep respect for it. My grandfather served in the military during World War II. And I have a deep respect. I think I piss off liberals when I say this sort of thing, I think. But
no, I respect you for that. Like, I really do. I come from kind of a similar, I had, my family has a military background as well. Mm-hmm. And, I do believe that the best way to keep the peace in the world is to have a strong military combined with diplomacy. Your military is your last resort, but you have to have it. You have to keep your powder dry. Keep your powder dry. Exactly.
And that's exactly right. That's exactly right, Sean. And one of the, even the, I don't remember, who was the guy? There's been so many officials in the Trump administration. It's hard to remember who the original Secretary of State was. Was that Rex Tillerson, maybe?
Rex Tillerson.
T-Rex, Rex Tillerson. Yeah. T-Rex, right? Like way back when. And he said, right, this is a guy who did a really dastardly thing to the State Department, right? But people were saying, and it's true, it's like, look, military is the stick, but you have to have the carrot, right? And you have to be, that's why diplomacy in the State Department is so important. Now, I obviously disagree with what he did with the State Department for obvious reasons, but right, war should be the absolute last resort, but the threat must be credible, right? The threat has to be credible, right? You can't be Panama and saying like, oh yeah, well if you come and take our canal, which is actually what the Americans did, if you come and take our canal, we're going to kick you the fuck out. Well, no one fucking takes that seriously, right? No. Nobody takes it. People don't even take, right? People take Russia seriously, China seriously, and America seriously. Even when Britain says something like that, people are like, well, yeah, okay, yeah, you're a big guy, but you're not that big of a guy, right? But having a big stick matters, we're not pacifists on this show, and I think we piss off liberals. But look, if pissing off liberals, sometimes you got to piss off liberals,
Hey, if you want to sleep well at night, you sleep better at night knowing that there is a military protecting us.
Absolutely.
Right now, with Trump, of course, the larger threats are coming from within our own borders, and Trump has let down our guard with our traditionally worst enemy, Russia. We did reach a point of being kind of frenemies at the end of the Cold War, but
Sure.
that's it's not the case now. We're back to
Yeah,
we're back to brinksmanship and saber rattling and all of those things. Every time you have this situation, this was very commonplace when I was growing up, that that there would be Russian fighters who would intercept an American plane in an unsafe manner, and they do this deliberately. It's a taunting game that goes back and forth, where they come to Alaska and then we intercept them. They intercept us somewhere over near Russia and or anywhere where we're operating. It could be now because of aircraft carriers. They could intercept us anywhere in the world. So
absolutely,
you have these little skirmishes going on that were really commonplace during the Cold War. Well, they're becoming commonplace again, which is really
absolutely
just shows you where we are as a country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to point out, right, because Top Gun 2 is coming out at some point, and I obviously, for obvious reasons, think that Tom Cruise is garbage for all the reasons that he's garbage. But I do love Top Gun, and you're right. And in one of those skirmishes, right, is when he goes inverted. Right, and he goes like canopy to canopy with the MiG fighter. But it was a play on that exact thing that you're talking about, right? Which is like MiGs would come up and they would just like basically taunt you. They would like MiGs. By the way, a MiG is a Russian-built fighter. There have been a whole line of them from like MiG-15 all the way up to something like in the 30s, and they basically are always just a step behind what we're doing, right? And a lot of, and they've done the KGB did a lot of stealing of our technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One thing America still builds is really good fucking airplanes, and people always steal the technology. Also, let's talk. Can we talk about the fact that the Russians are old school KGB poisoning people, and also that back to the Trump thing, Trump refuses to denounce it, right? He says, oh, well, we don't, how he does his waffling where he's like, oh, well, we don't really know, but we're looking into it. We don't know, blah, 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 but refuses to do a full-throated sort of condemnation of this. And by the way, the evidence now is overwhelming that it was Soviet era Russian nerve agent that was used. Like, I mean, Soviet era, first of all, you can't make this shit up. Are you really going back, right? That's all you guys have left is
There's a story about this. I mean, this is called Novichok, or I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, but it is the name for this nerve agent, and it's so poisonous that one squirt from a perfume bottle onto your skin will kill you, and that's in fact what happened. They left an empty perfume bottle with this stuff in it, and this woman picked it up, and she died. And it's a horrible death. Like this sends you into convulsions. It shuts. Basically, what happens is that your muscles, the nerves, do not shut down. So all of your muscles in your body tense until you die. That's kind of what happens. So
that is a god awful way to go.
It's an awful way to go, and you could hear in the recording that there was on the plane of this Alexei Navalny. I mean, he was groaning like within an inch of his life, and they managed to get him to a hospital in time. The antidote to this is atropine, and I don't know if the Russians gave it to him, but he finally got it when he went to Germany. They put him into a coma. But the interesting story about this is that the guy who discovered it and who made it for the Russian government or the Soviet government at the time, there was an accident in the lab and a tube ruptured and he got some of it on him, and he was basically, he lived, but he was never the same. It caused permanent brain damage and it just ruined his life. The guy who invented it.
The guy who invented it. I mean, come on, right? And this sort of like this is in line with the Wuhan virus conspiracy theories, right? That like the Chinese were creating a virus and it just got out. I mean, it's right out of like the Umbrella Company and like these video games, right? These zombie video games. But here is a real story of the guy. It's a matter of record. As a result,
yeah,
it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
You can look it up. You can Google it. It's I just did because I was interested. But
yeah, fair enough.
But this is interesting, though. Too, there's another development that's happening, because you were talking about Russian planes and and versus American planes and how good they are. Well, what happened recently in the past couple of weeks is they ran a simulation where they had an AI controlled fighter flying a simulation against a human controlled fighter, and the AI actually won the dogfight.
No shit.
Yes,
that's fascinating.
This just happened.
That's fascinating and terrifying, but not even, I mean, that could be a really interesting conversation we could have, and maybe we should have that convo when we switch over to the AI thing, because that is fascinating right there.
That was my segue, because we need to talk about our intro, which, you may have heard as the show started. We now have a female announcer, but it's actually a computer voice.
Yeah, which is fascinating.
Spoiler alert.
Before we move on, though, can we talk about that guy in Arkansas real quick? Can we just touch on that? Let's touch on that real quick.
Yeah,
the Arkansas sheriff, right? Because here's the Arkansas sheriff. For those of you who don't know, and I posted this on Facebook, you can check it out. Check it out there. Now, he is. Sean will be able to clear this up, because you're usually better with the details than I am. But Sean, the bottom line is, this guy, sheriff, an elected official, right? He goes ahead into a store with his girlfriend, his baby mama. Not that's a bad thing. Whatever. I'm sure she's a perfectly lovely lady. She's speaking to the clerk at the checkout. We all go to the supermarket, and even with the spit guard that's up now, right? Because of COVID-19, because we are still in a pandemic. Everybody, let's not forget that. So now he's having a conversation. Turns out that the cashier is black, and after they leave the store, the sheriff and his girlfriend, they're out in the parking lot wherever they were, and she manages to start recording on her phone. Sort of, it's the recording's black because it's just audio, but he goes on a racist tirade. A racist tirade doesn't even begin to describe it. It was N-word after N-word after N-word, and berating his girlfriend for one, which is just sort of this patriarchy thing of like controlling her, who she talks to.
For what?
Right?
Talking to a black clerk?
Talking to a black clerk. He called him, "Are you an N-word lover?" Blah, 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 and just went the most. And by the way, it's tough to listen to because it is not bleeped out. It is not bleeped out, and so it is tough to listen to. But then obviously this goes public, and he though swears to God, right? Little G. He swears that he is not a racist. He says, "I'm not a racist man. It's always so funny to me, Sean, when people, and I've heard this many times before, when people, because no one's ever a racist, right? No one's ever a racist, right? So, but people think to themselves that even if they're throwing the N-word around when they get angry, that somehow they can be not racist. And this guy in particular says he's not racist because he is a good Christian man. And now I'm just going to, now that I've teed that up for you, Sean, I'm just going to go ahead and let you just kick it off the fucking tee.
Well, first of all, I mean, the essence of racism in America and pretty much everywhere is racism denial, right? Because, and we talked about this before, the cartoon racism that's the tip of the iceberg is saying the N-word, right? But having those feelings, like being a police officer who is sworn to protect and serve black Americans just like white Americans, equal protection, 14th Amendment, all of those things, okay? And having that opinion, just even having that opinion, even if you don't act on it, okay? Just holding that opinion in your heart or in your brain, as the case may be, is deplorable. It's inexcusable. There should be anyone who expresses such opinions is not capable of enforcing the law equally. And that's what's really going on here. And so, of course, you know, when someone says, I couldn't be an ex, murderer, rapist, racist, whatever the hell it is, because I'm a good Christian, what they're doing is they're reinforcing this trope that says that in order to be a good person, you have to be a religious person. And what happens instead is that religion turns into a substitute morality. And that's what we're seeing here is that this person thinks, they fancy themselves to be a moral person because they're Christian. But in the reality is that in their heart, mind, whatever, they are they're a hater. I mean, they're a racist. They believe that they are superior and that black people are inferior. And the same with immigrants, the same with gay people, the same with transgender, women. I mean, the very fact that he believed that he could talk this way to his girlfriend and berate her for who she had a conversation with. I mean, what is this, fucking, Soviet, North Korea, whatever? I mean, are we not free to, I mean, these right-wingers always talk about free speech, but then, they'll say, why were you talking to that woman? Well, are you an N lover,
Absolutely. I was just obviously not surprised because I know this sort of thing happens, but it's never not appalling, right? Even though I know these people exist, even though I have been called the N-word before personally, right? Mm-hmm. On more than one occasion, right? I nevertheless am appalled every time. And there is the toxic brew here, right, of Christianity, patriarchy, and misogyny, and racism, right? And you and I talk about this stuff all the time because it's always about the hierarchy. You cannot parse these things out. They are the same because really it's about hierarchy, right? It's always about being able to dominate those that are below you, mm-hmm. right? And be subservient to those above you, 100% in either direction, right? Mm-hmm. And so this guy felt very comfortable berating his girlfriend. It just goes to show, I mean, this is probably a normal conversation for them, right? And the fact that and this is a guy who's then going to have to go out and enforce the law. That should be disqualifying, right? From the outset, disqualifying, right? These sort of questions are questions that you should be interviewed about before you ever become a law enforcement officer, right? These are things that you should have to, that you should be
not just interviewed,
scrutinized.
Not just interviewed, a full background check, social media check. Talk to your friends, talk to your family. Is this person, does he treat, because here's the thing, the law, which you swear an oath. By the way, I recently read the law enforcement oath, in connection with that article that we just published on just words fallacy. And the law enforcement oath means you swear to uphold the law equally. And you cannot do that if you're a racist or a sexist. And unfortunately, Christianity contains the seeds of hierarchy. It contains the seeds of patriarchy. The Bible is very clear about all of these things. There's so many quotes in the Bible that are in favor of sexism specifically, patriarchy specifically, and metaphorically as well, because you have God as the top dog who everyone has to fear and submit to, and there's just no way to separate the racial hierarchy or the gender hierarchy or the economic class hierarchy, for that matter, from this idea that society should be stratified. And this is an old story in humanity. It's not just Western religion. I mean, the Hindu caste system is an even worse situation where these people aren't even different races. They're just from different areas, or they're born into different families, and suddenly their opportunities for life are determined by where they were born and who their parents are. It's just it seems like we humans just naturally gravitate towards these structures of hierarchy. And I want to say that I'm not, it's kind of like what we're saying about the military. You need a strong military to keep the peace and to have freedom. And in the same way, you have to have a hierarchical structure based on achievement, based on someone's abilities. If someone spends, you're a lawyer, you passed the bar exam, you did all of those things. So therefore, in your field, you are above others who did not do those things. A clerk or an assistant or someone like that is not at your level, but that's because of achievement. It's not based on anything else. It's earned hierarchy. So what we need to emphasize is the need to have a solid earned hierarchy in society, which means respecting expertise, respecting education, respecting hard work, and good character. Those things we need to preserve. Wow,
Sean, you just absolutely nailed it there, and I think that one thing I think is important that we do here on the Radical Secular is not only talk about what we're against, but talk about what we're for, right? And one of the things that we are absolutely for, hierarchy is in some sense inevitable. I wrote about this in a Facebook post earlier this week. In some sense, hierarchy is inevitable, but it's hierarchy based on something other than authority, right? From an ancient text, or based on someone's race, or based on what family someone was born into. Like, that kind of hierarchy is arbitrary. It's arbitrary, and I said that in this post as well, right? Even the fact that white people are on top of the planet, right, that rule the planet, that is arbitrary too, right? It just happened to be, right? There's theories about this, east-west trade routes versus north-south trade routes, right? And so it's easier to develop when you're going east-west, because the atmosphere, the temperature, the climate is the same when you go side to side. So that means that makes trading easier, that makes development easier, that makes technology easier to spread. And so you see that in Europe, you see that, and on the other hand, up and down in Africa and in South America, right? Different climates. Different people don't interact the same way. It's a really, really different experience. And so that's a really good theory of why white people develop technology faster. And because human beings tend to want to dominate other human beings, white people did exactly that with their technology. If situations were reversed, black people probably would have done the same fucking thing. We would have been sitting here I would have been the white guy and you would have been the black guy, right? And that's just right. How it would have been. And that's the reality of it. But what we need to develop as a society, as a civilization, is a way of creating a society that is not based on who happens to have the most power. That is the promise of America, right? That is the promise of democracy. That is the promise of peaceful transfer of power. And we are seeing that systematically dismantled by this administration. And by the way, it didn't start with this administration. It started a long time ago. This is just a coup de grace. This is just a cherry on the top, right? This is the end result of 30, 40, 50 years of conservative thought invading America.
Well, we have to go back to the reactionary mind and actually understand why why dismantling hierarchy is considered to be such a threat. And I recommend, it's too long to go into the whole idea here, but it is when reactionaries, it's very hard to understand, looking at Trump and looking at Trumpers, why are they so angry? Why are they so angry at black people for just wanting to be treated the same? And they to the point where, Trump actually said, he said that anti-racism training in the federal government is anti-American. So what's the obvious conclusion here? Okay, Trump just admitted, because he always tells you exactly what he's thinking and exactly what he's doing, and even though he lies through his teeth out the yin yang, he always ultimately admits what he's doing. And so by that logic, okay, that means that America is racist, because if being anti-racist is anti-American, then he just admitted that America is racist, which is fucking stunning, if you ask me.
Yes. It really is, and also true. Regardless of what Nikki Haley in her pink frock says, she is just the fucking worst. Just like sitting there staring into this is, by the way, everybody at the RNC, staring into the camera and saying with a straight face that America is not racist, and then proceeding to go into a discussion about her experience with racism in America. Like, right, you really can't make it right. She literally just said exactly what, right, it's just, wow. Just wow.
Well, you do know that Nikki Haley changed her name to Americanize it, okay? If that isn't an admission of racism in this country, I don't know what would be.
Absolutely. She had to change her name, right? She had to Americanize it, right?
Yeah. So, that's just that again, Republicans admit their hypocrisy every single time. There's not one Republican talking point where at some point somebody blows it. They let the cat out of the bag as to what's really going on with it, and it's just it's endless. I don't know what to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And look, I mean, why don't we transition a little bit? You had a really great segue, and now I'm sort of bungling the segue, but it was a really good segue into our AI. Because look, we talk about reactionary, right? And there is fundamental to conservatism is reaction, right? And not it is always in response to progress, right? That's what conservatism is, right? Conservatism is a defense of privilege and it is at its most fundamental. And one of the things that we're going to see in this sort of AI revolution, and we'll talk about that, of which the AI intro to our show is a harbinger. One thing we're going to see is a extreme reaction to the idea that when AI takes over all the jobs, right? And then that's what we call the singularity. When AI finally is just, there aren't any more, there are so few jobs left that for people to do anymore, that we have to start distributing the wealth, right? Because people literally don't have jobs in order to earn it. And so that we could expect an extreme reaction to that from the right.
Well, this is what I think we have to start calling this the political singularity, because what's going on right now is that, and this is something actually Ray Kurzweil, who originally coined the term the singularity in his book, The Singularity is Near, which came out in 2005. That book really, if you haven't read that book, you really don't understand what's going on, because most people in their minds look at technology as something that has a linear progression, because for hundreds or thousands of years in human society, things stayed largely the same. Change happened very slowly, but lately change has been accelerating, and there's a number of reasons for that, having to do with Moore's law and a lot of other technological laws that basically show that over time, transistors double, processing power doubles, speed doubles, and it enables all these things. Initially, when computers first came out, they could process text, and then they could process audio, and then they could process video, and then they could process 3D animation in real time, which is what you see with video games. I mean, they're rendering scenes at 60 frames per second and even higher, for video games that are practically indistinguishable now from reality. So you've got this situation where, because of this technological progress, it is changing everything. I mean, it's taking over. So for example, in my career as a television editor, I used to work a lot with voiceover talent, and it used to be a thing where they'd have to come into a studio and book an expensive session with an engineer, and then they would record so this whole process would take days to get a voiceover recorded. So much so that television stations and networks and everything, they had their own booths, and so they could turn it around quickly. But if you're a production company, you'd need to book time and do this. So then with the internet coming in, what happened is a lot of these voiceover artists would put in T1 lines in their house so that they could do real-time recording from their house to a studio. So that was another level because otherwise they'd fly these guys in. I mean, these highly paid VO talents, like the voice of ABC or the voice of Fox or whatever, they'd fly these guys in to do this work, and they're getting $1,000 for a 5 or 10 minute session, because that's like the union minimum, because so it was a very expensive, and I worked with a lot of these guys, and what ended up happening is that sometime in the mid 2000s going into 2010, it started to be where I'd just be on the phone with them from my house, and they're at their house. They record the audio, they'd send it to me, send an email, or post the audio file on a server, and boom, I got it. So the whole process became much more streamlined because of the internet, and people could work from anywhere. So I'd be talking to somebody, they'd be in Alaska or whatever, they'd be, and I'd be in Los Angeles. Well, now we're in a situation where artificial intelligence voice generation is approaching the level of human voice, and it's not like people don't sound like Stephen Hawking anymore. When you have a voice generator, it sounds like a real person. And so I ran across this as an ad on Facebook feed for like $35 to buy this voice generation software, and so I said, well, I'll try this out, and it actually worked brilliantly, and I really actually like the sound of this for our show, and it's not perfect. You could tell it's not a person, but it's really good.
Yeah, it really, really is good, and it's really phenomenal. So, first of all, part of the reason why I wore the shirt today too was because I am a proud feminist, right? And I think that's tough for whatever reason for men to say. I don't, whatever reason. I know exactly what the reason is, because men don't come on, let's not hide the ball here, right? But we all know why, and that's because men think it's weak to be feminists. And also men tend to like dominating and patriarchy. And we talked about earlier, when people have power, people don't like giving up power. And so I think, right, the reason why we don't have a Hillary Clinton president right now, part of the kaleidoscope of reasons why we don't have a Hillary Clinton president right now, and why we have a raging pandemic, and why we have a fascist for a president, is because of misogyny, right? Plain old 100%. Misogyny, right? Right. I mean, Joe Biden right now is doing better in those same swing states that Hillary Clinton won, and Hillary Clinton was doing at this time in the race. So there's no doubt that misogyny is real, and so I think it's really, really cool that we have a female voice. And by the way, we need more female voices on this show and on the Just Words Fallacy. We're going to be hopefully posting a female voice on woman's voice on the Just Words Fallacy in the upcoming week on Thursday. Those articles come out every Thursday afternoon, by the way. And so, yeah, so I think that's really, really cool that we're doing that. And so get into the AI element of this, right? It is something that we really ought to be concerned about. And we ought to be concerned about, not because it sucks to not have to go and be a wage slave, right? That's actually fucking awesome. Like that'd be great. Like if you and I could just do this, right? How awesome would that be? If I didn't have to go and like spend 40 hours a week doing X, Y, and Z, and I could just focus on this and on social justice and things that I am super, super passionate about. That would be fucking awesome, right? And a lot of people would love to do that, right? But I say we should be afraid because we are dealing with the United States and the Protestant work ethic, and we're dealing with capitalism, a capitalist elite that does not want to share the wealth. All the gains go to them. They don't go to everybody else. And so that's terrifying. That is terrifying if you are one of like your average Joes like you and I, right? What happens when there's literally no more work to do?
Well, and it's hitting everybody because there are, I was a television editor, and I did a lot of color correction, and now there are automatic tools to do a lot of this work. Just like the voiceover artists, editors increasingly, the work's either sent overseas or it's done by bots. And it's just every year that's going to become more of the thing. So we have two aspects of this here. The first aspect is the work aspect, where AI is going to work us out of jobs. And the second aspect is related to the first because it's the fear of replacement. Humans have a tremendous fear of replacement, and you think it's bad with immigrants, okay?
Wow, great reference. You're so right.
A lot of Americans are very afraid that their job would be taken by an immigrant. Well, guess what? The bots are coming for you a lot harder than immigrants.
And a lot cheaper. Way cheaper.
Like I said, this was a $35 plugin that I bought to generate this voice, and right now it's about 80% there in terms of sounding like a real human with inflection and everything else like that. Okay, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, it'll be 100% there, and it's going to replace every voiceover artist in the world because there's no reason why not.
Of course, right? And talk about one of the number one. I believe it's number one. It's definitely the top three. Employer of men without a college degree, I believe, is trucking, and that industry is going away. And I think it's really hilarious. It's not hilarious. It's tragic when conservatives defend big corporations, right? Because really what they're defending is hierarchy, right? Because they love it. They love hierarchy. So they love it to see that rich person up there commanding, and a captain of industry commanding people, and they love licking boots, right? Love to lick boots. So love licking boots. So shiny ass boots. So but it's funny because, right, these exact same people are perfectly happy. They will cut your job I mean, look, they're actually looking actively for ways to cut your job, right? Like, they don't actually have to wait for the singularity for that to happen. If they can find a way to make trucking cheaper, they will. They absolutely will. And these jobs are going away, Sean. You and I know this. These jobs are going away, and it's easy for people like me to think like, oh, like, or you or me to say like, oh, we're skilled, right? We have these talents, right? We're immune from this. We are so not immune from this.
Look, accounting, all the white collar jobs, analysis, market research, all those things, even being an attorney. Like there are.
Yep. Oh, definitely.
There are bots right now that are doing a lot of that work. No one is safe. And so let me bring this. There's a couple of reference points, and one is, of course, the first time when this came up with automation with the Luddites. And you're familiar with that story, I'm sure, where automated looms had been invented in I believe it was the 18th century in England, and workers were being put out of business or out of jobs because these automated looms were taking over the textile business. And so this guy, Ned Ludd, came in with a group of people and smashed the equipment, because to them, this was their livelihood. It's going away. And everybody else is going, but wait a minute, we all need clothes. We need more cloth, and we need more than you can make. Yeah. So this is actually has a lot to do with Trumpism, because what caused this kind of revolution, aside from racism, was the fact that a lot of white middle-class Americans were losing their jobs to foreign competition, to brown people, in other countries who are being paid, a fraction, 10%, 5% of what their pay is. So, you had these great union jobs at auto plants and steel plants and things like that, and, where they're making the equivalent of what today would be $30, $40, $50 an hour, and suddenly it's going, these jobs are going away to people who are making $2 and $3 an hour and happy about it.
Stoked, happy.
So
happy.
It's the same thing, but it doesn't really matter whether your job is taken by technology or taken by a foreign worker. It's still gone. And so this is why you have a modern sort of Luddite movement in the United States as well, where you see things like people smashing Teslas and other high technology vehicles. There's this big backlash. And so you got to fast forward to around 2015. There was a really great video that was made by, I believe it was CGP Grey, and it was called "Humans Need Not Apply." And so if you just Google that on YouTube, it's about 15-minute video.
You showed it to me. It was outstanding. Go ahead.
Outstanding.
Keep going.
And that's 5 years ago. This is 5 or 6 years ago. And so we're starting to see it's no coincidence that we had someone elected on a populist platform that had to do with people losing their jobs to brown people, at the same time as automation is taking even more jobs, because the two get conflated a lot of times. And so I started really looking into this because I wanted to see, because it became obvious to me that robots and whether it's in factories or software bots are basically teeing the world up for an inevitable transition to socialism. Because we have two choices. We can go to everybody is completely out of work, they're starving, which means, by the way, if they're starving, they don't have money to buy products. So if you don't have money to buy products, then what are these capitalists running the factories for?
Exactly.
Who is it for?
Exactly. And look, and the number of people that will be able to buy any of those products will just continue to shrink, right? Until it's just a handful of people who are running factories, who own factories that are completely automated, right?
And they could build yachts for each other, that's what all the
Exactly. Build yachts for each other. I was thinking as you were speaking, is fascinating that, like you say, the populism that brought us Trump was also the populism that brought us Bernie Sanders, right? So Bernie Sanders is sort of the positive version, and frankly the real McCoy, whereas Trump is absolutely not a populist. I mean, he uses populist rhetoric, or he did, but he's none of his policies are populist, right? But I think what's really interesting, and this is one of the things that I disagree with Bernie Sanders and the Sanders folks, is because Sanders wants to bring those jobs back to America, right? He wants to, and this is a problem with unions, right? Today's one of those days we're going to piss off liberals, I guess. That's fine. Sometimes we got to piss off liberals, right?
No sacred cows.
Exactly. We go after, right. We don't go after people just for the sake of going after people. We go after ideas, bad ideas. I don't care where bad ideas come from. We will confront them on the Radical Secular. That's what we do here. So it's really interesting, right? Because and I've seen this I'm friendly with some folks on Facebook that are union guys, right? In fact, they're the only sort of white men that are liberals and not college educated, but are liberals still. There's like the last bastion, right? There's some of these union guys. Anyway, and they say things like, "Oh, don't use the automated checkout at the store, right? Because you're ruining people's jobs." And same thing with the globalization idea. It was like, "Oh no, let's bring all those jobs home." Like, no, that's not the solution. The solution is we have to redistribute resources because we don't have a choice. The only other option is basically to just create gigantic ghettos, which interestingly is exactly what we're talking about in terms of the Star Trek thing.
Yeah, and I want to finish up on that because basically,
please do.
What's going on here is a modern version of Luddism, right? They're sort of they're blaming the consumer for doing something that's convenient, that's better for the consumer, for getting rid of these jobs. It's like, no, you can't hold back the tidal wave. You cannot. I mean, what's next after that is every product has an RFID chip in it. You just walk out of the store with it, and there's no checkout.
Right. Oh my God. Of course.
There's already Amazon stores that I think are doing that in some places. They have some experimental stores where you just take the products, you just walk out. There's no shoplifting. You just it
right.
just charges you. So this is an issue because it's the same thing with Buy American, and it's the same thing with trade protectionism. Okay, everybody who's taken a basic economics course, a basic international relations course, understands that protectionism doesn't work. It never works. All it does is make everybody poorer in the world because you've got a distribution problem, and that's what you have to solve. And so
exactly.
So yeah, so it's really unfair, and actually, when these people get a chance in their own lives, these union workers, they're only too happy to shop at Walmart and buy these products that are made with people who are getting $2 an hour. So what we really needed to do, instead of going the Reagan route in 1980, where we suddenly, we've tripled productivity since then, but wages have stayed stagnant, and that happened because of the corporate tax cuts and because of all that. What we really needed to do was to export labor unions around the world so that the labor unions were operating in these low-wage countries. And that's actually what the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal that a lot of liberals were very against, and it's something that, this was a really good deal because it contained requirements. It said you cannot import goods into the U.S. unless you conform to basic environmental and labor standards. And that actually was better protection for American workers than tariffs.
Absolutely, man. That you just nailed it, right? And I call myself an Obama Democrat in a lot of ways because I think Obama, and not only because he's black, obviously, and that's fucking awesome, but just because, and it doesn't mean I agree with everything that he did. I think that he was far too soft with the Republicans. Far too optimistic, far too soft, far too optimistic with the Republicans, and that cost him and cost America dearly. But things that he got absolutely right were first, like things like the drone program, things like he was perfectly willing to use force, right? He wasn't like Clinton. Clinton was really tepid with force, not Obama. Obama was perfectly willing to say, hey, yeah, you give me a force, you can give me a force multiplier. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Let's get drones up there. Yeah, it's not ideal, but I can make that deal with the devil. Fine. Let's do it. Right. We have to get this done. And another thing he did was these global deals, right? Because these things are so critical. Like you say, and this is one of my hugest problems with the Sanders left, and of course the Trumpian right. Talk about horseshoe theory, right? We talk about horseshoe theory all the time, right? We get back to the same place, which is that trying to hold back a tide. You cannot hold back that tide, right? All you're doing is delaying the inevitable, and in the meantime, people are suffering, right? People are suffering in the meantime, right? Including low-wage workers in Bangladesh and in India and everywhere else, right? And by the way, you and I on this show, we are willing to piss off liberals because if bad ideas are bad ideas, but we're also globalists, right? We think that we ought to have a global government. That ought to be where we are going, right? Because that's the only way you really, really start to address the factionalism that's inherent in human nature, right? And then we talk about that's why we always talk about the United Federation of Planets, right? Because in that environment, the world was one big government organization, et cetera. So again, I think that's something that Obama got right, and I think that this is something that I think we ought to go forward with as a nation in the future.
Well, it's absolutely right, and we hit on this, we hammer on this constantly, and it goes back to it again. I mean, if there's one common theme in our show, it is hierarchy, and the reason why white nationalists are against globalism is because they want to be on top of the heap. They want America to be above America über alles. That's what they want, and ultimately, these trade deals would result in transfer of wealth from the United States to these other countries, and it would bring these other workers up to the level of American workers, which would bring them into direct competition. Now, competition is not a bad thing so long as those workers had their rights protected.
Exactly. And one of the things that I like to say a lot is I'm all about, in general, I think cooperation is better than competition, right? I think competition is for babies, people with very small, and I think it is for people with small vision, people that can't work with other people, and people who want to dominate other people, right? Conservatives. I think that cooperation is definitely a better approach when possible. Of course, that's not to say that I don't think that we should compete in sports or or ideas, right? We need to compete in what ideas are better. But when it comes to competition that leaves all of us worse off, for one, and second, leaves people in the lurch, right? Bangladeshi sweatshop workers are left in the lurch so that I can have a cheap T-shirt. I'm not okay with that. I also don't want to pay $75 for an American-made T-shirt, because that's also something that I don't want, and that's it, right? And we can find an efficient level, right?
The blunt competition, the brute force competition, hurts everybody, right? Because if again, the Bangladeshi worker should be getting at least, okay, maybe you're not going to pay him $15 an hour, maybe $5 an hour, right?
Something.
$5 an hour, and then the American worker, can get 15. The problem is that the structure is not there for Bangladeshi workers to cooperate with American workers because their interests are at odds with each other. The Bangladeshis are trying to dig themselves out of abject poverty, whereas Americans are trying to maintain a standard of living. So it's like I don't know how that would ever be cooperatively arranged unless you had a single one world common market, and that's what these trade deals they are bridges. These trade deals are bridges to that place where ultimately, because what you want to do is you want to raise standards of living. You want to make sure that an African child or a Bangladeshi child has the same access to health care, clean water, education, and opportunity as an American. And the white nationalists do not want that. They don't want. They want to quash it. They want to nip it in the bud. They want to prevent these areas from ever developing. Because
absolutely,
if they develop, then they can't be exploited.
Absolutely, like that. And that is so important, Sean, because again, we hammer on hierarchy in this show so often because it's so critical and it's so central to the problems that we are facing as a planet, and as a planet, not as a nation, as a planet, as a unified human race, right? And from the most selfish perspective, right? We are all better off when everybody has enough, right? We are all better off. We have better outcomes, right? We can go to anywhere in the world, right? I mean, I personally don't want to go vacation probably in Bangladesh, right? And as a result, I don't get to experience the culture, right? I don't. And by the way, how about all those Bangladeshi kids who could be brilliant people, right? Bangladeshi kids who could be contributing to our global market, to our progress as a species, right? These people are just spend their entire life just trying to live, and that is bad for humanity overall. That is bad for all of us, right? That's a loss. That is a loss of a potential talent, right?
Well, you have no idea, of the millions and millions of Black Americans who were kept as slaves,
Jesus.
Not allowed to read or write, so
Exactly.
that not allowed to learn anything about anything, and that's a similar situation in these very very undeveloped countries. They want to put these kids in factories right away. They have child labor. They make bricks. They do all kinds of just unimaginably horrible jobs that they're not really even paid well for. And so this is the way that the hierarchy wants it. They do not want globalism because, and not only that, it covers things like climate change, because climate change is something that cannot be handled unless everyone is involved. Because if the countries that don't deal with climate change, they have a temporary advantage of being able to make cheaper goods because they're belching out carbon, but unfortunately that carbon affects all of us. So we're really getting more and more into a future where we either unite or we will destroy each other, because countries that trade with each other don't generally go to war. That's the reality. Like China, if China, you think, okay, well, China's building up their military, and they are, okay, but if they attack the United States, they lose one of their major markets. So we have to integrate to have peace. And so if liberals are truly in favor of ending war and having peace, they have to be in favor of global trade. And they cannot, that cycles back around to why Bernie Sanders was wrong on this.
That is absolutely right. And you hit a really important point there, Sean. I just want to come back to it. And that is this idea that, trade brings peace, right? And Steven Pinker hammers on this a lot in his book. And by the way, everyone out there should look up Steven Pinker. Please look up Steven Pinker and read those damn books, because this sort of thing like change revolutionized the way I look at the world. And I cannot stress them enough. And Steven Pinker, I have my criticisms of Steven Pinker. Don't get me wrong.
So do I.
We definitely do, but boy, this guy pumps out a lot of really good fucking ideas too. And one of them is that, look, if you really, peace and prosperity comes from trade, right? So this is how we get to a world that trading partners don't fight with each other. We don't fight with Europeans, right? Of course we don't. We trade with them, right? And frankly, we don't even fight with China, right? Because we trade with them, and until recently, obviously. And we don't. And look, who we do fight with? Russia. And who we don't trade with? Russia, right? So it's like, right. So you see, when there's common interests, we're all better off. And here's the alternative, Sean. The alternative is, and this is what, on a global scale, this is what's happening. On a global scale, right, impoverished people are basically cordoned off in their countries. And so that we don't have to look at them, we don't have to think about them, we just get to exploit them from afar and live in our suburban neighborhoods, right? And this is, I think, a really great segue into the Star Trek thing, because that's exactly what happened in this episode, right? The episode that we're talking about right now is DS9, Deep Space Nine. A lot of we always joke, there's a lot of the Venn diagram in terms of our listenership and Star Trek fans. I think we have a lot of Star Trek fans out there, but Deep Space Nine is one of the best Star Trek shows for sure. And in this particular 2-part episode in the 3rd season, I believe, is called Past Tense, and the entire episode starts surrounds this place in San Francisco that has been. The crew of Deep Space Nine finds themselves, through various science fiction-y type stuff, finds themselves in 2024 San Francisco. And they find them, and since they don't have any sort of ID or anything like that, they get put into this, what's called the sanctuary district, District A. And basically what they've done, what society has done, is they have taken all the undesirables, right, and they've put them in this sanctuary area. So you have people they call the DIMS, so that are people who have mental disorders, people that we see on the street now, right, and we walk past, right. They also have in there what they call the ghosts, which are just sort of like tough guys. And then you have the gimmies, who are people who just don't have jobs, right? And these aren't criminals, right? There's a there's a prison for people who have committed crimes. This is just for people who just don't have jobs and just don't have housing, right? And what I'm saying, the reason why I'm bringing this up, and I think is really relevant here, is because we are moving towards that society. And this dovetails really well with the AI thing, right? Because the only way you deal with the AI revolution without redistributing resources is this, right? You just take a bunch of people and put them in a ghetto.
Well, it's classic fascism, and I think what we can infer from the way that series was portrayed, first of all, I have to explain that the setup for this was that they were going to Earth for a Starfleet conference, and of course Starfleet headquarters is in San Francisco. And this, it's kind of funny because the idea of the all the time distortion and time paradoxes that happen in Star, it's complete batshit, but it's a great storytelling device. It's a great storytelling device, and I love it. And what they nailed it. Not only, I mean, there aren't too many shows that work with near-term predictions because it's too easy to be proved wrong. And this show was made in 1994, and so they went forward to 2024, and I can't even imagine how spot on they were in terms of the timing and everything else like that, of that we would be dealing with this situation 30 years into the future. And at the time when I first saw it, when it came out, I was like, well, that would never happen. Bill Clinton's president, and we're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. We would never have, like cordon off people in cities and imprison them for not having a job. That's total fascism. But here we are.
Here we fucking are, man. And yeah, and you're absolutely right, is that, it's funny, like we joke around, right? I rewatched Deep Space Nine, the entire season within the last year, and I rewatched these two episodes like within the last couple of days in preparation for the show to refresh my recollection. And it's really funny, right? It's such a 90s show. Right? First of all, let's just talk about that for a second. Right? Their predictions of what like technology would be like in the 2024.
They were ridiculous. The computers were ridiculous.
Oh my God, it was so absurd. I mean, like these little tiny screens that are like the size, the size of like my,
and these triangular consoles that were angled.
Yeah, that go into your desk, right? No one has a cell phone, by the way. No one has a cell phone. Yeah. No cell phones. Right? They hadn't thought that up, which is so funny, right? Because the original Star Trek predicted the flip phone, right?
Yes, and invented it basically.
They had basically invented the flip phone. So you would think that they would recognize that this would be a big deal in 2024, but no, which is just so hilarious. And also, and my favorite part of it in terms of the aesthetic is that, everyone is wearing clothes that's just from 1994. They didn't even bother like trying to make like 2024 clothes. It's just like, no, these are all 90s clothes, man. Like, and all the various like 90s tropes, even the, in 1990 shows too, and I always thought this when I was in the 90s, like, right, they tried to be as egalitarian as possible, but eschewed reality. So, right, anytime people get imprisoned or anything like that, right, factions develop immediately, and they're based on race, right? I mean, that's always what happens, right? So it's really funny that you have like the captain of the bad guys is like this white dude with like long hair and like this hat. There's such a 90s villain. You're like, oh God. Totally. But all that being said, and this is true for all of Star Trek, right? Because especially the new Star Trek Discovery and everything like that is very high budget. But back then the budget was really small. And so, the technology wasn't great, et cetera. But what they get absolutely right is that the prediction of income inequality, because another important part of this show is that there are really wealthy people that are doing really, really well, and they're in their little apartments with their classical music and clinking glasses, and they're talking about all those people out in the out in the sanctuary area, and that have been literally cordoned off. And what also is really fascinating about the episode is that that moment in in Earth's history was a turning point, a flashpoint, right?
It was pivotal,
because what happens is the riots. There are riots within the sanctuary city and sanctuary area. And what I thought was fascinating, Sean, was that it started out as a peaceful protest. That's what I loved, right? It was supposed to be a peaceful protest. People were bringing their kids and their families to show that, look, we're just normal people. We don't deserve to be here. We don't deserve to be in prison. We just want jobs. And also their demands were that they wanted to end the sanctuary area, and they wanted a federal jobs act restored. Right. You can't make this shit up, Sean. They predicted it. They predicted it. And guess what? The peaceful protests, some people came out and took advantage of it, and they started rioting.
Yep, and that's what kicked the whole thing off, where they ended up taking hostages, and they were basically negotiating. And what finally solved the situation, and this is so perfect for right now, is that they were able to get themselves with a video feed onto the net so that people could see the predicament. They could see that it wasn't just undesirables. A lot of these people were former managers and white-collar workers and of all races and genders. And, they could speak to the population and say, hey, look at what's happening to us. You could be next. And that turned the tide. And what was so interesting, and that's why this time trope is so powerful, is that the minute those guys went down, the minute Cisco and Bashir and Dax beamed down, all of a sudden, every radio signal, every communication, every outpost of the Federation disappeared. Because after they had affected the timeline, right, humanity went downhill. There was no Federation. And the only signal that they could detect was the Romulans from far away. So literally the outcome of this one protest, it's and this is, again, a time trope that I don't know how true it would be if we could test it out, but it's, the butterfly effect. And this idea of altering the timeline is very, very powerful, and small events can make a big difference, which is why you should vote.
Yes, absolutely. It's funny. I was thinking, as we were preparing for the show today, I was thinking to myself about Star Trek, and I was thinking to myself about the AI, our AI voice, our female AI voice that we have. And it started to make me think about female voices in general. And this is also capped off by the fact I've been on a rewatch of Star Trek sort of train. So now I'm on Star Trek Voyager, right? And Star Trek Voyager has Captain Catherine Janeway, the first female lead captain in a Star Trek show. And in the 90s, when I watched this show for the first time, I didn't really fully grasp the significance of that, but I do now. And Catherine Janeway, Kate Mulgrew, who is also Red from Orange is the New Black, so she's an amazing actor. She nails the part, but the Catherine Janeway's character does the most amazing job of doing what from what I understand, women have to do all the time, which is balance women who are powerful, balance between being taken seriously and being authoritative, but also maintaining some femininity, right? And not coming off as, quote, shrill or whatever.
Well,
now I'm not here.
Yeah, the trope of that is like the ball buster, right? The ball buster.
Oh, the ball buster, exactly.
Somehow guys just can't. And I, by the way, I've worked for women my entire life. Almost all of my bosses have been female, and I haven't found that to be true at all. I found them to be, to be absolutely great to work for. I mean, there have been bad ones. I had bad bosses like anybody, but the fact is that it shouldn't have had anything to do with gender. My masculinity was not threatened. It's the boss. You do what the boss says. Period.
Absolutely. And I work for a company now that is female dominated. We have all many of certainly both of my team leaders, my bosses are both female, but there in the leadership, there's a lot of women in leadership, and I have found a distinct difference in culture as opposed to my experiences in working in more male-dominated experience for men and in more male-dominated environments. But I think Captain Janeway, as they were writing that show in the mid to late 90s, they had to, I'm sure, balance. The 90s is not now, right? We are used to having women in power in a way that we weren't in the 90s, and so I think that they really had to balance it. She couldn't be a ball buster, right? She had to be to walk a really, really fine tightrope. And I think that I'm not a woman, but I am a black man, and I do know that there is a line to walk for me, right? I want to be taken seriously. I want to not be talked down to. I want to not be taken, and I want to not be assumed to be X, Y, and Z. But at the same time, I don't. So that means I need to be authoritative, but I also don't want to come off as aggressive, right? Because I don't want to be an angry black man either. So I imagine women walk a similar tightrope. I bring this up just because, and as we start to get toward the end of the show here, I want to bring this up only because women are going to be so pivotal in this election, man. White men are gone, right? Like white men are not voting. You posted one of those maps where it says like if only white men voted or if only black women voted, and it's like if white men vote, it's just all red, right?
California, if only white men voted in California, Republican.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's what I'm talking about. So my point is that if the Democrats are going to win, if we're going to win, we need women to come out in droves, and we need suburban women. And it's nice to hear that there is a bit of a shift there from the last time around. I know personally, my own personal anecdotal experience, being online all the time, like you and I are on Facebook and all the time, and talking to people. And I have seen a definite shift in terms of the words and even just the likes and the comments on my posts coming from women from where I grew up, for example, right? And which is a very conservative area. But I've seen suburban women defecting because this is not what they signed up for, right? And so patriarchy is strong. Patriarchy is really, really strong. Women contribute to patriarchy. In fact, patriarchy wouldn't exist without the acquiescence of women. Go ahead.
Internalized misogyny, internalized patriarchy. I mean, white women put Donald Trump in office. I mean,
exactly.
No question about it. And I think this you have to ask yourself, because when it comes to sexism against Hillary Clinton, which we know made the difference. I mean, Joe Biden got like 10% more votes in most states than Hillary did in the primaries. So a lot of guys and women were willing to vote for Joe Biden that weren't willing to vote for Hillary, weren't willing to vote for a strong woman. And this is just this internalized misogyny. And we talked about that a little bit before. You know, they want to be able to continue to top from the bottom, and the patriarchy as a system it facilitates that for them. And so I think that there were many women who just did not want to be told what to do by another woman.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of that, man. I think there's a lot of that. You talk about internalized misogyny, internalized racism, right? I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the studies. I'm sure all of you out there have heard of the studies where, you ask a black girl, which doll is good, which doll is bad. She's looking at a black doll and a white doll, and she points to the black doll and she says that's bad, right? And this is just a child. This is a child, man. This is a child, right? We're not talking about a teenager. We're talking about a child, right? It is so ingrained in our society.
They pick up the cues from their parents and teachers and caregivers around them. They pick up all the subtle cues, the little messages, the comments, the offhand remarks. Exactly. They pick that stuff up even as young children.
Exactly. And the same thing happens with women, right? Same thing happens with women and patriarchy. And like you say, there are women benefit from patriarchy, right? A lot of women benefit from patriarchy. They can have their suburban life with their husband that works in the city, and and they go to and they don't have to think about the Bangladeshi kid, right? They don't have to think about the poor black kid or Latino kid in Jersey City or in Manhattan over there, right? And they just get to have their little bubble, and they're really happy in their bubble, and they'll vote to keep that bubble. But my point is that women out there, and please contact us if you want to get on the show, because we would love to have more women on this show. We're in fact next week we're going to have one of my friends. Her name is Meg, and I won't say any more than that, but she's going to be on the show next week, and it's going to be a really interesting conversation. But women, we all need to get out and vote. We all need to take this very seriously, right? The polls are tightening, right? And as they do, as we get closer to the election, but we're fighting up against so many different levels of voter suppression, of apathy, of people that are unhappy with Biden because he's not liberal enough. And of course, we're dealing with the Republicans and they're just outright bald-faced lies. So we need everyone to show up to contribute. So it looks like we're just at about time. Sean, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say that, more than any other election that I can think of in my lifetime, this is really the political singularity. We do not know what's going to happen. We don't know what, this is the point at which it's all converging to this vote right now for Joe Biden. I mean, our entire future of the world depends on it. And as far as I'm concerned, if this goes the wrong way, our future will wink out, just like that, just like all the Federation radio beacons winked out in the show. That's where we're at. I mean, I don't see the world coming back from this. It's very difficult to build structures of democracy, particularly global structures. And they're in the process of being demolished, and Trump's going to continue that wrecking ball if he is allowed to stay in office.
Oh boy. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, man. That is everybody, please, for the sake of democracy, for the sake of all the things that we just talked about, either reversing those things or advancing those things, as the case may be, let's vote. Let's get serious about this. Let's pay attention. Let's talk to our friends. Let's talk to our family. Let's get people engaged. Well, I guess here we are at the end. So once again, I'd just like to remind you to make sure to subscribe to our podcasts, subscribe to us on YouTube. Also, give us a rating if you are a friend of the show, and talk to your family and your friends. Give us a 5-star rating, etc. Check out the Just Words Fallacy Medium page as well. We have a lot of interesting stuff coming out there. And look, just thank you for being here. And remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.